Zahara's heart pounded as she stood in the palace courtyard, her wrists chained, her torn dress brushing the dusty stone floor. The torches around her burned bright, throwing sparks into the dark sky. Then he came, King Hwansuk, tall and broad, his storm-gray eyes shining like metal. He looked at her like she was a secret only he could see. The air between them felt sharp, hot, like fire ready to burn. Zahara lifted her chin, refusing to bow, and his lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Before we dive into this fiery love story, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Jade Lantern Stories. Sit back, relax, and let's begin. The palace courtyard still smelled of blood. The night air was thick with smoke, and the stone ground was dark from the day's battle. Fires from the raid still burned in the distance, their glow painting the sky red like a second sunset. The sound of horses and clanking armor echoed through the courtyard as soldiers dragged in prisoners from the ship they had captured at sea. Among them was Zahara. Her wrists were bound with iron chains, her ankles scraped from being dragged across the deck and through the mud. She stood tall anyway, her chin lifted, her golden brown eyes burning with quiet fire. She did not cry like the others. She did not beg for her life. The soldiers pushed her to the center of the courtyard and made her kneel. "Bring the prize to the king," one guard barked. The heavy doors to the throne hall opened, and King Hwansuk stepped out. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and terrifying in the dim torchlight. His black robe was stained at the edge with fresh blood. His storm-gray eyes were colder than the steel sword at his side. The soldiers immediately fell silent, dropping to one knee. The whole courtyard seemed to stop breathing as the king walked down the steps slowly, his boots echoing on the stone. Zahara raised her head and stared at him. He stopped in front of her, towering over her small but proud figure. For a long time he said nothing. His gaze moved over her face, her hair that still smelled of sea salt, the blood on her torn dress. His eyes lingered on the strange birthmark on her collarbone, a pale crescent shape like a moon. "Where did you find her?" The king's voice was deep and sharp like a blade. "On the foreign ship, your majesty," the captain of the guard said, bowing low. "She fought like a wild cat. She bit 2 of my men. We thought you might want her alive." The king's eyes narrowed. "Alive? Yes, your majesty. She is unusual." King Hwansuk crouched so that his face was level with Zahara's. He reached out and grabbed her chin, forcing her to look into his gray eyes. "Who are you?" he asked quietly. Zahara's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. "I am Zahara Dangana, daughter of Chief Dangana of the Niger coast." Her voice was steady. The king tilted his head, as if surprised she dared speak to him like an equal. "You are far from home, Zahara of the coast," he said. "Do you know what I do to my enemies?" Zahara's lips curled into a small smile. "I imagine you kill them." The king's mouth twitched. For a moment there was silence, and then he laughed. It was not a kind laugh. It was low, dark, but strangely amused. The guards shifted nervously, shocked to hear their king laugh at all. "She has fire," the king said. He stood up and turned to his men. "Take everyone else away. This one stays." The soldiers obeyed immediately, dragging the other prisoners away. Soon the courtyard was empty, and the king was left alone with Zahara. He turned back to her and said, "Follow me." When she did not move, his eyes darkened. "Did you not hear me?" "I am not your servant," Zahara said. Gasps came from the shadows where a few palace servants were still watching. No one spoke to the king that way. The king's face did not show anger. Instead, a slow, dangerous smile spread across his lips. "You are bold," he said. "Good. I hate cowards." He stepped closer, his tall frame casting a shadow over her. "But understand this, little moon. In my palace you will do as I say, or you will die." Zahara's throat felt tight, but she kept her head high. "Then kill me now," she whispered. Something flickered in the king's eyes. For a moment he looked almost human, almost curious. "No," he said finally. "You will not die tonight." With a flick of his hand, he motioned to the guards. "Take her to my chambers. She will stay there from now on. If anyone touches her without my command, they lose their hands." The guards bowed quickly and grabbed Zahara, pulling her to her feet. As they dragged her away, Zahara looked back at the king. He was still watching her, his storm-gray eyes unreadable, his mouth set in a thin line. The king's private chambers were massive, with gold screens, black silk curtains, and a wide bed covered in white fur. Zahara was pushed inside and left there under guard. She walked slowly around the room, refusing to sit. She touched nothing, but her eyes moved over every detail. When the king entered some time later, the guards bowed and quickly left, shutting the doors behind them. He walked toward her, silent, his boots soft against the polished floor. "You do not kneel," he said. "I kneel for no man," Zahara answered. The king's lips curved into a slow, cruel smile. "Then you will stand until you collapse," he said. He walked past her and sat on the edge of his bed, undoing his heavy robe. His muscular chest, marked with scars, glowed in the firelight. "Serve me," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "I am not your pet," Zahara said. The king turned his head sharply and stared at her. For a long moment they locked eyes. Then he chuckled. "Perhaps not," he said. "Perhaps you are something else." He lay back on the bed, one arm behind his head, and said lazily, "Sleep there by the fire. Do not run. You will not leave this room without my order." Zahara did not answer, but she sat down on the soft rug by the fire, her chains clinking. The dream. That night, King Hwansuk tossed and turned in his sleep. He dreamed of a moonlit field, the air silver and cold. Zahara stood there, her hair loose around her shoulders, her skin glowing under the moon. She looked at him with soft eyes and whispered his name. He woke with a start, sweat running down his face, his chest burning. He ripped open his robe and looked at the curse mark carved into his skin long ago. It glowed red like hot iron, pulsing with pain. His breath came fast as he stared at the fire. "Who are you?" he whispered into the dark. Zahara, sleeping by the fire, stirred but did not wake. The king's hand clenched into a fist. He could not shake the image of her in the dream. Her voice, her eyes, the moonlight on her skin. And for the first time in years, King Hwansuk felt something dangerous. Oh. The palace was silent, but Zahara could feel its eyes on her. Days had passed since she was brought to the king's chambers. She was never allowed to leave. Guards stood outside the doors night and day, swords at their sides. The windows were barred, and the air was thick with the smell of incense and burning wood. Zahara paced like a caged tiger, her bare feet brushing over the soft rugs. The room was beautiful. Silk curtains, golden lanterns, painted screens of dragons and mountains, but it was still a prison. Every night, the king came to sleep in the same room. He rarely spoke to her. He gave orders in his deep voice. "Eat, stay, sit." And she obeyed, but only because she had no choice. At night, when she thought he was asleep, she would hear him muttering, growling like a beast in his dreams. Sometimes he would shout and wake himself up, sweat running down his chest, his hands gripping the sheets like claws. One night, she saw him kneeling by the fire after a nightmare, his back to her. His shoulders were shaking, his breath ragged. "Who do you see when you dream?" Zahara asked softly. He turned sharply, eyes flashing like silver. "Do not speak to me." Zahara stayed quiet, but in that moment she understood. The king was haunted. Something deep inside him was breaking him every night. The next morning, Zahara waited until the king left for council. 2 guards stayed outside, but inside the chamber she was alone. She searched the room carefully, her eyes sharp. She wasn't just looking out of boredom. She wanted to know who this man truly was, why he looked at her like she was something more than a prisoner. Behind a painted screen, she found an old chest covered in dust. The lock was broken. Inside were scrolls. She sat on the floor and unrolled one carefully. The words were written in faded ink, but she could still read them. When the moon daughter rises from the sea, she will tame the wolf king's rage. Her blood will wash away the curse of the first betrayal. Zahara's breath caught. Moon daughter. Rage. Earth. Her fingers brushed the crescent birthmark on her collarbone. Was this about her? The sound of silk sliding against the floor made Zahara freeze. The chamber doors opened. A tall woman entered, dressed in layers of black and gold. Her hair was streaked with silver, her face cold as carved stone. Queen Dowager Myung. The air grew heavy. The guards bowed deeply and stepped aside as she walked in. "So," the Queen Mother said, her voice smooth and sharp, "you are the foreign girl my son keeps hidden." Zahara stood up slowly, rolling the scroll back with quick fingers and tucking it behind her. "Your Majesty," Zahara said, her tone calm but respectful. The Queen studied her from head to toe. "You are prettier than I expected. No wonder he is distracted." She walked over to the table where a servant had just placed a tray of tea. "Sit," the Queen commanded. Zahara sat, her heart beating hard in her chest. The Queen poured tea into 2 cups. The liquid was dark, almost too dark. A faint bitter smell rose from it. "My son is not a kind man," the Queen said, handing her 1 cup. "I would save you pain and suffering. Drink. It will make things easier." Zahara looked down at the tea, then back up at the Queen's cold eyes. Slowly, she lifted the cup to her lips, then tipped it just enough for the tea to spill onto the floor. She set the empty cup back on the table and smiled sweetly. "Thank you, Your Majesty. It was delicious." For a brief moment, silence filled the room. The Queen's lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes were like knives. "You are clever," the Queen said softly. "Clever girls do not live long in this palace." She stood, gliding toward the door. "Be careful, foreigner," she whispered as she passed Zahara. "I am watching you." The doors shut behind her, leaving Zahara sitting alone, her palms sweaty. That night, Zahara sat by the fire, staring at the scroll she had hidden under her dress. The prophecy played over and over in her mind. The moon daughter shall tame the wolf king's rage. Could she really tame a man like him? The doors slammed open. King Hwansuk entered, his presence filling the room like a storm. He was still in his dark council robes, his hair slightly messy, his jaw tight. "Stand," he ordered. Zahara stood, her heart hammering. His sharp gray eyes moved around the room until they landed on the scroll in her hand. In 3 long steps, he was in front of her. He snatched the scroll from her grasp and held it up. "Where did you find this?" he growled. Zahara lifted her chin. "Behind the screen. You dare search my chambers." His voice was low and dangerous. "I wanted to know who you really are," she said, her voice shaking but steady. His breath came faster, his jaw clenching. "You read it." "Yes." In an instant, he pinned her against the wall, one hand on the stone beside her head, the other gripping her wrist. His face was so close she could feel his breath on her lips, hot and fast. His storm gray eyes burned into hers, full of anger, but also something else. "Do you know what this means?" he asked. Zahara's pulse pounded in her ears. "Yes, it means you are cursed." His grip tightened, but his voice was a low, almost desperate whisper now. "And do you know what it means for you?" Zahara swallowed hard. "It means I am the one who can break it." For a moment, silence filled the room. The firelight flickered over his face, showing the battle inside him. His hand slid from her wrist to her chin, tilting her face up toward his. "You should be afraid of me," he said, his voice rough. "Maybe I am," Zahara whispered. "But maybe I am more afraid of what will happen if I leave you like this." The king's breath hitched, and for one wild moment, Zahara thought he might kiss her. Instead, he stepped back suddenly as if burned, throwing the scroll onto the table. "Do not touch anything that belongs to me again," he said harshly, turning away from her. But his shoulders were tense, and he did not look back at her as he strode out of the room. Zahara touched her chest, her heart beating so hard it hurt. Something had changed between them, and she wasn't sure if it would save her or destroy them both. The nights in the king's chamber had become quieter. Zahara had learned that the king's nightmares came like storms, sudden, loud, and violent. At first, she stayed as far away from him as she could. But one night, when he thrashed in his sleep, gripping the sheets with white knuckles, something inside her moved. She crawled closer to his bed, her chains clinking softly, and began to sing. Her voice was soft, low, like the lullabies she used to hear from her mother. The words were in her native tongue, a language the king did not understand, but the sound seemed to reach him anyway. His breathing slowed. His fists loosened. When he woke the next morning, he stared at her for a long moment. "You," he said in a quiet voice, "stopped the storm." Zahara looked at him carefully. "You dream of pain." The king's jaw clenched. "I dream of blood." Zahara did not look away. "Then I will sing until you dream of peace." He said nothing, but for the first time his hand brushed against her cheek, just for a moment before he stood and left the chamber. That night, the king came to his chamber earlier than usual. He did not sit on the bed immediately. He stood near the fire, his broad back to her, his shoulders tense. "You are not afraid of me anymore," he said without turning. "Maybe I should be," Zahara said softly. He turned then, his gray eyes catching the firelight. He crossed the room slowly until he stood in front of her. "Why do you stay close to me?" he asked, his voice low. "Because even monsters deserve to sleep," Zahara said. Something broke in his face then. Not anger, but something softer, something that made him look almost human. He stepped closer until she could feel the heat of his body. His hand came up and cupped her chin, tilting her face toward him. Their breaths mingled. Zahara's heart pounded so loudly she was sure he could hear it. His face moved closer, closer, until his lips hovered just above hers. But then he stopped. His hand dropped as if burned, and he stepped back sharply. "No," he said, his voice rough. "If I want you, you will die. That is what the curse does." Zahara's throat tightened. She wanted to tell him she wasn't afraid. She wanted to tell him she had already decided to fight for him, curse or no curse. But the words never left her lips. That night, the palace was unusually still. The moon hung low, casting pale light through the barred windows. Zahara slept lightly by the fire, while the king lay on his bed, his sword within reach. The first sound was faint, a shuffle of feet where there should have been silence. The king's eyes snapped open. Before he could rise, the door creaked open and dark figures slipped inside, their faces covered. Assassins. One moved toward the bed, dagger raised. Zahara woke with a start and saw the shadow just as it lunged. "No!" she cried, throwing herself across the bed. The blade sank into her side before the king could move. Zahara gasped, the pain burning through her body like fire. The king roared, a sound so loud and deep that the assassins froze for just a second. It was all he needed. He grabbed his sword and struck, the blade flashing silver in the moonlight. One assassin fell, blood spraying across the floor. Another tried to run, but the king's hand shot out and caught him by the throat, snapping his neck with terrifying ease. The others fled, but they would not get far. Zahara was bleeding fast. Her hands were pressed to her side, but her fingers were wet and slippery with blood. "Huan Suk," she whispered weakly. The king turned to her, his gray eyes wild. "Stay awake," he ordered, his voice breaking. He tore off part of his robe and pressed it to her wound, but blood kept soaking through. The mark on his chest began to burn, not just with heat, but with power. His rage exploded. A scream tore from his throat, shaking the very walls. The fire in the hearth leapt higher, brighter, until it spread across the curtains, the rugs, the screens. The palace guards outside heard the scream and rushed in, only to freeze at the sight of their king glowing with cursed energy, fire dancing around him like a living thing. "Kill them all!" he bellowed, his voice echoing like thunder. He grabbed Zahara in his arms, lifting her as if she weighed nothing. Flames consumed the chamber, licking up the walls and ceiling. The heat was unbearable, but the king walked through it as if it were nothing, his gray eyes blazing. Servants screamed and scattered as he marched through the burning halls. Zahara clutched against his chest. The guards threw open the doors to the throne hall as the king stormed in. His robe singed, his face streaked with ash. The court was gathered there, shocked and pale as they watched their king, who looked more like a wrathful god than a man. He laid Zahara gently on a silk-covered couch, then turned to face them all. "Assassins entered my chambers tonight," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "They dared lay hands on what is mine." He turned slowly, his eyes scanning every face. "Listen to me well," he growled, his voice cold as steel. "If anyone touches her again, they will die by my hand. I will not stop until their blood runs like a river through this palace." No one dared breathe. The fire still burned outside, sending smoke curling into the hall, making the scene even more terrifying. Zahara, weak but conscious, saw the way they all bowed their heads to him, fear written on every face. She closed her eyes, her heart pounding. The king was no longer just a tyrant. He was something far more dangerous. And now the whole palace knew. The girl from the sea was under the protection of the Wolf King. Zahara woke to the sound of crackling fire and the faint smell of medicine. Her body felt heavy, but the pain in her side was gone. When she blinked her eyes open, she realized she was lying in the king's bed, the bed she had never been allowed to touch before. Soft white silk wrapped around her body, warm against her skin. Her side was stitched neatly with golden thread, and someone had cleaned the blood from her face and hair. Her breath caught when she saw him. King Hwansuk sat at the edge of the bed, his sword across his lap, his storm-gray eyes fixed on her as if he had been waiting for her to open her eyes. "You live," he said quietly, his voice rough. "Yes," Zahara whispered. He exhaled, almost like a sigh of relief. "Good." For a long moment they just stared at each other. His face was tired, his hair slightly disheveled. There were dark circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. "You stayed here?" she asked softly. "I have not left," he admitted. His voice was deeper than usual but softer too. "I did not sleep. Not until I knew you would wake." Something inside Zahara's chest ached at his words. This man, the ruthless king who had terrified her when they first met, had sat by her side all night. "Why?" she asked. He looked away for a moment, his jaw tense. "Because the thought of you dying," his hands curled into fists, "it would have burned the whole world." Zahara's heart pounded. She did not know what to say, so she stayed silent. Later, when the room was quiet, he stood and poured steaming water into a large wooden basin near the fire. He rolled up the sleeves of his robe, his muscles tense, and turned toward her. "You need to be cleaned," he said. Zahara hesitated. "I can do it myself." "No," he said sharply but not unkindly. "You are still weak. I will do it." He walked to the bed and lifted her as if she weighed nothing, carrying her to the basin. He set her down gently on a low stool. The heat from the water rose in soft clouds. Hwansuk dipped a cloth into the water, wrung it out, and knelt in front of her. His large hands moved carefully, almost too carefully, as he brushed the cloth over her arms, washing away the dried blood. His fingers trembled when they touched her skin, as if he was fighting something deep inside himself. Zahara's breath quickened. The room was silent except for the sound of dripping water and the crackle of the fire. When he cleaned the wound at her side, he moved even slower, his touch so gentle it made her throat tighten. "You should not risk yourself for me again," he said suddenly, his voice low. "I will," Zahara answered. His head snapped up, his gray eyes meeting hers. "Why?" "Because you matter to me," she said simply. For a moment, his face softened completely. His hand lingered at her waist, his thumb brushing against her skin. "Do you know what you are saying?" he asked, his voice rough. "Yes," Zahara said. Their faces were close now, so close she could feel his breath on her lips. He leaned forward, just enough that she could see the battle in his eyes, the wild hunger, the fear, the longing. Then, just as quickly, he pulled back. "Not tonight," he said, standing suddenly. His jaw was tight, his hands balled into fists. "If I take you now, the curse will not spare you." Zahara swallowed hard, her chest tight. She wanted to tell him that she didn't care, that she would risk anything for him. But before she could speak, the chamber doors opened. The royal shaman entered, his white robes whispering against the floor. His face was pale, his eyes clouded as if he had just returned from a trance. "My king," the shaman said, bowing low. "The spirits have spoken." Hwansuk turned sharply. "What did they say?" The shaman's eyes moved to Zahara. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "She is the one," he said softly. "The hidden moon." Zahara's breath caught. "What does that mean?" Hwansuk demanded. The shaman's voice trembled. "It means she is the only one who can break the curse that haunts your bloodline. But the price will not be small." "Speak plainly," the king growled. The shaman took a deep breath. "When the next lunar eclipse comes, her blood must be spilled beneath the moon. Only then will the curse be broken." The room fell silent. Zahara's hands curled into fists. "So I have to die?" The shaman did not answer, but his silence was enough. Hwansuk's face went pale. His hands clenched so tightly at his sides that his knuckles turned white. "No," he said finally, his voice deadly calm. "There must be another way." "There is no other way," the shaman said. The king's storm-gray eyes burned as he turned toward Zahara. "No one will harm you," he said fiercely. "Not while I live. Curse or no curse, I will not let them take you from me." His words echoed through the chamber, his vow heavy like iron. But Zahara's heart pounded in fear. She could see it now. The path ahead of them was drenched in blood and moonlight. And the night of the eclipse was coming. The palace was no longer quiet. Word had spread like fire that the foreign girl was still alive after the attack, and that the king had burned half the palace to protect her. By morning, whispers filled the halls. "She has bewitched him," the servants said. "She put a spell on his heart," the guards muttered. "She will bring ruin to us all," the court ladies whispered behind their fans. At the center of it all sat Queen Dowager Myanghi, her face calm but her eyes sharp. "This girl is a curse," she said to the council, her voice cold as ice. "She must be removed before she destroys my son and this kingdom." But no one dared move against Zahara openly. Not yet. Zahara could feel the stares on her everywhere she went. The guards bowed low now when she passed, but their eyes were hard. The palace maids no longer spoke to her kindly. Their words were clipped and full of venom. Even in the king's chambers, she felt the weight of the prophecy pressing on her chest. Every time Hwansuk touched her, even if it was just to brush a loose curl from her face, her heart ached. "I am falling for him," she thought late at night, staring at the moon through the barred window. "But if the shaman is right, loving him means my death." Her hand went to the golden stitches on her side. She was still healing, but her heart had already chosen. It happened on the third night after the council meeting. Zahara had just fallen asleep by the fire when she woke to the sound of soft footsteps. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw 3 palace maids standing over her, their faces hidden by shadows. One held a silk pillow in her hands. Before Zahara could cry out, they pressed it down over her face. She kicked and struggled, her muffled scream filling the room. Panic clawed at her throat as she fought for air, her lungs burning. Then the door slammed open. "What is this?" Hwansuk's voice roared like thunder. The maids froze. Zahara shoved the pillow away and gasped for breath, tears stinging her eyes. The king's gray eyes blazed with fury. He strode across the room and grabbed the nearest maid by the throat, lifting her off the ground. "You dare touch her in my house," he growled. "Your Majesty." The maid choked, but she never finished. The king drew his sword in one swift motion and cut her down where she stood. The other two maids screamed and fell to their knees, begging for mercy. Hwansuk did not give it. One strike, then another, and the room went silent except for Zahara's ragged breathing. The king's chest heaved as he looked at Zahara. His face was splattered with blood, his sword still dripping. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice low now, almost shaking. Zahara shook her head, too stunned to speak. He crossed the room in 3 steps, knelt beside her, and cupped her face in his blood-stained hands. "They will not touch you again," he said, his voice like a vow. And Zahara, despite the fear still pounding in her chest, felt something inside her break. She wasn't just afraid of him anymore. She needed him. Later, when the bodies had been removed and the floor scrubbed clean, Hwansuk sat beside her by the fire. "You should hate me," he said suddenly. Zahara looked at him, surprised. "Why?" "Because my hands are covered in blood," he said, staring down at them. "I am a cursed man. I was born to kill. Even the people I love." He stopped, his jaw tightening. Zahara placed her hand over his. "You killed to save me," she said softly. His head turned toward her, his gray eyes searching her face. "You are not afraid?" he asked. Zahara's heart thudded. "I was," she admitted. "But not anymore." Something flickered in his eyes then, something raw and unguarded. His hand rose to her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. "Do you know what you are doing to me?" he whispered. Zahara's breath caught. "I think I do." For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. The firelight painted their faces in gold, and their shadows leaned toward each other like they were about to touch. But before anything could happen, a loud horn sounded outside the palace. Moments later, a guard rushed into the room and dropped to one knee. "My king," he said breathlessly. "Prince Seojin has called an emergency council meeting. He demands your presence, and he demands the girl be brought as well." Hwansuk's jaw clenched. "Why?" The guard swallowed hard. "He says she has committed treason." Zahara's blood turned cold. "Treason," she whispered. Hwansuk rose to his feet, his face a mask of fury. "No one accuses what is mine and lives," he said, grabbing his sword. He turned to Zahara and held out his hand. "Come. Let them say their lies to my face." Zahara placed her hand in his, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. Together they walked into the cold night, the sound of drums echoing through the palace. In the council hall, all the nobles were gathered, their faces pale and tight with fear. At the center stood Prince Seojin. His lips curved into a smug smile. "Brother," Seojin said smoothly, bowing just enough to be polite. "I regret to inform you that your foreign pet is plotting against you. I have witnesses who swear she tried to poison the royal wine." Gasps filled the hall. All eyes turned to Zahara. Hwansuk stepped forward, his gray eyes flashing like lightning. "Say that again," he said softly, dangerously. Seojin smirked. "She is a traitor, brother, and you must do what is right for the kingdom. Execute her." The hall went silent. The firelight flickered, throwing long shadows on the walls. Zahara's heart pounded as she met Hwansuk's eyes. Would he choose her, or the throne? The council chamber was silent. Only the crackle of the torches could be heard as King Hwansuk stood face to face with Prince Seojin, his sword pressed against his half-brother's throat. One wrong move and blood would paint the floor. "You dare accuse her in my hall?" Hwansuk's voice was low and dangerous. "You dare speak lies against what is mine?" Seojin's smile faltered, but he did not look away. "She will destroy this kingdom. If you love it, You will kill her before she kills us all. Hwansuk's eyes burned like cold fire. His grip tightened on the hilt of his sword. Then I will destroy the kingdom before I lose her, he growled. Gasps filled the room. Nobles backed away, their faces pale with fear. Hwansuk! Zahara's voice rang through the hall. He turned his head sharply, his gray eyes still wild. Do not kill him, Zahara said, stepping closer. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. If you do, you will drown yourself in blood. Stop this. For a long moment, it seemed he would not listen. His chest rose and fell with each harsh breath. His sword still against Sun's skin. Then, slowly, he lowered the blade. Sudden let out a shaky laugh, but Hwansuk's glare silenced him instantly. This is not over, the king said coldly. He turned, grabbed Zahara's hand, and pulled her from the hall. They rode through the night until the palace lights were far behind them. The moon was full, casting silver light on the dark forest as their horses galloped toward the mountain temple. By the time they reached the temple steps, Zahara's legs ached, but Hwansuk never slowed. He dismounted and lifted her down, holding her as if she were something fragile. The temple was quiet, its stone pillars glowing faintly under the moon. Lanterns burned low, casting soft golden light on the carved wolf statues that guarded the sacred place. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of incense. The walls were painted with scenes of old battles and curses broken under the moonlight. Hwansuk stood in the center of the temple, staring up at the painted ceiling, his face shadowed. I brought you here, he said, his voice quiet now, because I need you to understand. Understand what? Zahara asked softly. He turned to her, his gray eyes no longer cold but full of pain. I do not care about the curse anymore, he said. I do not care if it kills me. I want you to live, even if it means I will stay cursed forever. Zahara's throat tightened. She had never seen him like this, so unguarded, so raw. You would choose me over your kingdom? She asked. Yes, he said without hesitation. You are my kingdom now. Her heart ached at his words. Tears burned in her eyes, but she stepped closer to him. You should not say such things, she whispered. You make it harder for me to leave if I must. Then do not leave, he said. He reached for her, his hand brushing her cheek. His thumb traced her lips, slow and careful, as if memorizing them. Zahara's breath caught. You almost killed your brother tonight, she said. I will kill him tomorrow if he touches you again, Hwansuk said, his voice dark. I would burn the world for you. The temple was silent, the moonlight spilling through the open ceiling. Zahara felt her resolve breaking. She had tried to keep her heart steady, to remind herself of the prophecy, but at that moment she could not fight it anymore. She stepped closer, until she could feel the heat of his body. Then stay with me tonight, she said softly. His breath hitched. You do not know what you are asking for, he said, his voice rough. I do, Zahara said, lifting her chin. If I must die for you one day, then I want to live for you tonight. Something inside him snapped. In one swift motion, he pulled her into his arms and crushed his lips against hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was fierce, hungry, desperate. Zahara's hands tangled in his dark hair, pulling him closer. She felt his heart pounding against her chest, fast and wild. He broke the kiss only to look into her eyes, his breathing heavy. Say it, he demanded. Say what? She whispered. That you are mine, he said. I am yours, Zahara said, her voice steady. A low growl rumbled in his chest, and then he kissed her again, softer this time. His hands gentler as they traced her face, her neck, her shoulders. They sank to their knees on the temple floor, the moonlight washing over them like a blessing. For the first time there was no king, no curse, no throne. Just a man and a woman, giving in to everything they had been holding back. Later, as dawn began to creep across the sky, Zahara sat beside the temple well, her hair loose and her lips still swollen from his kisses. She was thirsty, so she reached for the wooden cup that sat by the well. She did not see the shadow in the distance. Prince Treason stood just beyond the trees, a cruel smile on his face. The water Zahara drank was cool, too cool, and tasted faintly bitter. Moments later, pain shot through her stomach. She dropped the cup, her hands clutching at her middle. "Huan Suk," she gasped, her voice weak. He turned instantly, his heart stopping at the sight of her collapsing to the ground. "Zahara!" he shouted, rushing to her side. Her lips were pale now, her breath shallow. "Poison," she whispered. Huan Suk's roar shook the temple walls. He gathered her in his arms and stood, his gray eyes blazing with a fury so fierce that even the gods might tremble. "Sujin," he growled under his breath, his voice like a promise of death. And then he carried Zahara out of the temple, the moonlight fading as the sky turned red with the coming dawn. The night of the eclipse had come. The palace courtyard was filled with torches, their flames shaking in the wind. Above them, the moon began to darken, a red shadow creeping across its silver face. The air felt heavy, as if the whole world was holding its breath. Inside the temple, Zahara lay on a bed of white silk, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. The poison had spread through her body despite every healer's effort. King Huan Suk stood beside her, his hands fisted at his sides, his storm-gray eyes filled with terror. "She is fading," the shaman said softly. Huan Suk turned on him, his voice sharp like a blade. "Then save her." The shaman shook his head. "Only the moon can save her now. And only if you make the choice." "What choice?" Huan Suk demanded. The shaman's eyes were grave. "Her blood must be spilled tonight under the eclipse. When it mixes with yours, the curse will break." Huan Suk froze. "And if I refuse?" "She will die," the shaman said. "But the curse will live on." The king's chest heaved as he looked back at Zahara. Her lips trembled, and she let out a faint whisper. "Huan Suk." He knelt beside her, his hand clutching hers. "Do not speak," he said, his voice rough. "Save your strength." She smiled weakly. "The moon is red tonight." Tears burned in his eyes, but he blinked them away. He had not cried since he was a boy, but now the grief felt like it would rip him apart. "You will not leave me," he said. "I will not let you go." The moon was now fully red, bathing the temple in crimson light. The shaman stepped forward, holding a ceremonial dagger. "The time is now, my king. Choose." Huan Suk's jaw tightened. His whole life he had been told that his curse was unbreakable, that anyone he loved would die by his hands. Now the gods had given him a cruel choice. Kill the woman he loved to break the curse, or let her die slowly and lose her forever. He gritted his teeth and grabbed the dagger. "No," Zahara whispered, her voice barely there. "Do not do it." Huan Suk looked down at her, his face torn between rage and heartbreak. "If I do nothing, you will die," he roared. "If you spill my blood, I may still die," she said, her eyes locking on his. "Do not do this because you want freedom. Do it because you love me." His hand trembled as he lifted the dagger. Then, with a fierce cry, he turned the blade and sliced his own palm open, blood dripping onto the white silk. Gasps filled the temple. He grabbed Zahara's wrist, cut a small line across her palm, and pressed their hands together, mingling their blood. The mark on his chest flared like fire, glowing brighter than it ever had before. The pain was unbearable, but he did not let go of her hand. "Stay with me," he shouted, his forehead pressed against hers. Temple floor shook. The wolf statues seemed to glow, their eyes lit with silver light. A wind howled through the open doors, carrying the sound of something ancient breaking, a chain snapping after generations of torment. The curse mark burned away, leaving his skin clean for the first time in his life. When the light faded, Zahara's breathing steadied. Her eyes fluttered open, her lips parting. "You did not let go," she whispered. Huan Suk's chest shook as he kissed her, his blood mixing with hers. "Never," he said. I will never let go." When they returned to the palace, the court was already gathered. Prince Treason stood at the center, smiling faintly, until he saw Zahara walking beside the king alive. "You tried to kill her," Hwansuk said, his voice calm but deadly. Treason tried to speak, but the king's sword was already at his throat. "No more lies," Hwansuk growled. "You poisoned the well. You tried to murder my queen." The king's sword struck before he could finish. Treason fell to the ground, his blood staining the stone. No one dared move. Hwansuk turned his gaze on the Queen Dowager, who stood pale and stiff at the side of the hall. "You conspired with him," he said. Her lips pressed into a thin line, but she said nothing. "Leave this place," he commanded. "You are no longer queen mother of this land. Step 1 foot inside this palace again, and you will join your son in the ground." She left without a word, her silk robes trailing behind her like a shadow. Days later, the palace bells rang. The throne room was filled with nobles, servants, and soldiers, all waiting. King Hwansuk stood before them, dressed in black and silver robes. Zahara stood beside him, her hair braided with gold, her dress white as moonlight. He placed a crown of silver and pearl on her head and turned to the court. "This is Zahara Dangana," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "She is no longer a prisoner. She is my queen." He looked at her then, his gray eyes soft. "My moon," he said quietly, for her ears only. "My salvation." Zahara smiled, tears shining in her golden brown eyes. In that moment, under the watching eyes of the court, under the still healing moon above, the Wolf King and the Moon Daughter stood together, curse broken, hearts bound, ready to rule side by side. And that was today's episode from Jade Lantern Stories. What did you think of Zahara and the fierce King Hwansuk? Let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to show your support. Your love helps us bring more thrilling stories your way.